In this video, we will show you how to install your front brakes on this Honda Civic. Order your parts from 1AUto.com. Let's get into it. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing you are going to want to do is safely raise and support the front of your vehicle so the wheel is off the ground. I like to have the suspension hanging. Once you've done that, continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts, the hubcap assuming you have one, and then the wheel. Now with the wheel out of the way, the next thing we want to do is pay attention to the caliper itself. In this area, there is a caliper piston. We want to make sure that we push it back. So I'll just be using a small pry bar, come in through this slot, and carefully try to pry up against the rotor and the caliper and gently start pulling this forward. Once you have some movement from that caliper, we're going to remove the two 12mm headed caliper slider bolts. One up here and one directly below it. For the first one, we'll fully remove it, give it a quick inspection, and then reinstall a couple threads. Now we can remove the caliper. Once you have it dislodged, give this area a quick inspection. We're looking to see if you see any liquid. If you do, it's probably brake fluid, in which case you'd have to replace that caliper. This one looks fine, so let's hang it aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose. Now we can remove the brake pads. Ours are stuck in the bracket, so I'll just tap them out of place. I always like to give them a quick inspection. If it looks like they're worn at an angle, you might have a caliper slider problem. Now that we have the pads out of the way, let's continue on to the two 17mm caliper bracket bolts. There's one right here and one directly below it. Once again, remove the upper one, quick inspection, start it back in there a couple threads. Now we can remove the caliper bracket. We'll give it a quick inspection and set it aside for now. Now the next thing we'll do is remove our two Phillips head screws. We'll do that using a Phillips head bit driver and a hammer. Put this in position, turn it counterclockwise, and give it a loving bonk. Inspect the screws as you remove them, replace them as necessary. Take hold of the rotor so it cannot fall off and potentially hurt you. Remove that lug nut. Remove the rotor. There it is, friends. Now with that rotor out of the way, the next thing you want to do is clean down the mating surface of your wheel bearing. We'll use some parts cleaner, and if you need to, you can use a wire brush. Now once this is nice and clean, we'll use a little bit of anti-seize along the mating surface. Alright, let's get ready to install our brand new brake rotor. Clean down the braking surface on the outside and on the rearward side. Before we put it in position, you want to pay attention to your two mounting holes, where those two Phillips head screws will go. Make sure that they are aligned properly with the mating hub. Now once those are in place, start in those two Phillips head screws. Snug them up and make sure they're nice and tight. Now we can move over to the bench and prepare our caliper bracket. To do that, we want to strip it down and clean it. Let's start by removing each of the caliper bracket tins. We'll just use a small pry bar for this. Pull them out of place and set them aside for recycling. Now once you have those out, we're going to continue on to our caliper slider pins. That's these right here. Grab onto the metal aspect of it and pull it away from the rubber boot without damaging the boot in any way. If you need to, you can use a small pick to separate the area. Once you have the pin out of there, use a rag and wipe it down. Give it a close inspection. We're looking to see if it's worn or damaged in any way. If you see any type of pitting or rot buildup, that's something that needs to be dealt with. This looks fine along here, but you also want to pay attention up inside this groove. It's important to make sure that that's clean and free of any debris. Otherwise, moisture could make its way inside here and seize this up, in which case you're going to have a braking issue. Now with the pin out of the way, let's make sure that we remove this boot and give it a close inspection. While removing this boot, essentially just grab onto it and give it a little wiggle. You can see it starting to separate from the bracket. We want to be careful not to tear it, otherwise you will have to replace it. Now that I have that out of there, I'm going to give it a quick stretch and make sure it's not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. If it feels like it's stiff, you want to replace it. Now at this point, we can do the exact same thing to the other slider pin. On this slider pin, you'll find that it has a vibration dampener. It's important to note exactly which one of these slider pin ports that came out of, so when you go for the installation, you can reinstall it in the same exact place. We'll wipe this down, give it an inspection, and set that aside. At this point, we've completely stripped down the caliper bracket. Now we can start cleaning it. Let's pay attention to the areas where those caliper bracket tins were. You want to make sure you clean out any of the rust or rot in this area. Otherwise, your brake pads might get stuck in position that causes a braking issue. To do this, you can use a wire brush. We'll give it a quick scrape. At this point, I've cleaned both of the sides, and we can continue on to our two caliper slider ports. For this, you want to make sure that it does not have any of the existing original grease in this area. We're going to replace it with brand new grease. Let's use some parts cleaner inside each one of these ports. Use a bore brush. Give them a quick rinse. Now we can set this bracket aside. Now we can clean our slider boots. To do this, we'll use a rag. Give it a quick twist and slide it through the center. Stretch out the boot and go ahead and give that a twist, and that's going to remove any of the grease onto the rag. One more quick inspection on the boot, set it aside, do the same to the other. Okay, now we can continue on by lubricating the caliper bracket. Let's use some high temperature caliper lubricant, and we're going to come inside of this port. Once you've done that, you can continue on to reinstalling your caliper slider boot. Once you feel as though you have it in the proper position, just give it a twist to work that grease in. We'll do the same to the other port. Now it's time for our caliper slider pins. Lubricate the entire shaft of the caliper slider pin, making sure that we're putting the right caliper pin into the right side of the bracket. This one has the vibration dampener, and that's something you want to pay attention to. While I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure I make my way all the way up into the groove. This will help keep moisture out of the area. We'll slide this into the proper port. Squeeze out any air from inside the boot. Do the same to the other slider pin. Now that we have each of the slider pins installed, let's move along to the areas on the bracket that we had cleaned down. We'll add a thin amount of that caliper lubricant. I'll do the same to the other side here. Now it's time for our brand new tins. Press it in, make sure it's secure, do the same to the other side. Now we can get this over to the vehicle. Now we can take that bracket and put it in position. Start in each of your caliper bracket mounting bolts. Once you have each of them started, snug them up and then torque them to 80 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our brake pads. In your kit, you'll find that you had two brake pads that come with a wear indicator. One will have it on one side, and the other will have it on the opposite side. You want to make sure you have the inner pad with the wear indicator facing down. So as the wheel is turning, if something was to happen, this could potentially break off, and it'll move away from the brakes rather than getting jammed in there. Let's take the pad with the wear indicator and slide it into the backside along here. Make sure it can move along freely. Now we'll install an outer pad, which is one without the wear indicator. Once again, making sure that everything moves freely. Now we can prepare our caliper. Use some high temperature lubricant and come right along the metal aspect of the piston. Once you have that lubricated, make your way along the backside of each of these two ears, essentially the mating points where the caliper will hit up against the pads themselves. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now we can take this and put it over the pads and the caliper slider pins. Continue on with your two caliper slider pin bolts. Bottom those out and torque them to 25 foot-pounds. Now we can install our wheel. Install your hubcap, making sure that you align your valve stem hole. Start on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts, bottom them out. We'll get the wheel back on the ground and torque each of the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. Now with the wheel safely on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay friends, we showed you how to do one side of your front brakes, pads, and rotors. The process will be the exact same thing for the other side of the vehicle. After you've done that, go ahead and pump up that brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Take your vehicle for a road test. Okay friend, we finished our installation. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.